Greetings, fellow connoisseurs of critical thinking practices and core content school subjects. This is Dr. Izad with another video in my series on using the Unity game design engine in language arts class. This video's focus is on more of the coding language, specifically demonstrating how to apply an attack animation to a character, and how doing so within the larger content of game design intersects with the teaching of various language arts related skills. Before I get into it, however, please take the time to hit the like button, subscribe, and share if you find this type of content useful. I'm all about placing emphasis on hard technical skills, and my videos are intended to demonstrate how doing so can be seamlessly incorporated into core content subjects, and does not have to come at the expense thereof. So, if you'd like to see more videos on how this is possible, please subscribe and share, and leave a comment telling me what type of hard technical skills you'd like to see incorporated into what specific subject, and I'll do my best to answer the request, as I really want this to be a useful page for teachers to get ideas for PBLs. Now, on to it. In the last video, I demonstrated how to create a dialogue system, and how doing so could contextualize content-related skills pertaining to writing for language arts, and we shall see how the same holds true for creating an attack animation with respect to the language standards as well as other standards for reading literature. Art skills, one of which implicates digital technologies. In this video, I will demonstrate how to create a playable portion of the game by writing a C# script. C# is the coding language that the Unity game design engine uses, and, as with all coding languages, C# has a syntactical and grammatical structure that must be understood and applied in order to tell the components within the game to do specific things. This pertains to the third standard for language outlined by the Common Core and New Jersey State Learning Standards for English, as you will be applying knowledge of language to make effective choices to write lines of code so that the game engine can accurately provide instructions to the different elements of your game. As such, there is ample room for teaching coding within the realm of language arts. With respect to the language standards, not only is the third one relevant, but the sixth one is as well, as each new thing we want the character to do will require application of existing knowledge of the rules of the C# language and syntactical structure, however large or small that body of knowledge may be, in order to determine the best way to express to the game engine what we want the character to do. And we'll see how this plays out as we add to the code that we already have to get the character to walk, the workings of which I had demonstrated in a previous video. And in order to get the Knight of Babel character to attack as such, we will have to get the script to reference things that will have already been included in the Animator, which you can find up here. Locations of the Animator tab may vary, but I have mine placed on the top of my scene. And you'll find an interface that looks like this, which you may remember from a previous video. But to review, this is where we will store the different animations we want for our character, and where we can create the parameters that must be met in order for those animations to be played. Content creators can create their own animations, but this character that I downloaded for free from the Unity Asset Store came with a bunch of different animations, like the walking animation that I had applied in the previous video. And you'll see that I already have an attack animation applied to my character, and I did this by simply going to the animations folder for the Night Warrior, which I had renamed the Knight of Babel, and finding the attack animation and dragging it over to this interface. When right-clicking, you can make the transition to the attack animation from the walking animation and back to the walking animation from the attack animation. I have set mine up as such because the character is perpetually in the walking state, and I want him to attack from that state and then return to the walking state when he is done attacking. And in order to trigger these transitions from one animation to another, we'll have to set certain parameters. And when I click on the line for the transition itself, you'll see the parameter that I want to be met in order to transition from an attacking animation is established here. And you can create your parameters by clicking on the Parameters tab in the Animator here, and you'll have these different parameter types. I created an integer parameter, and once it's created, you can rename it, and I named mine condition, which you can see is already created, and so I'll delete this one. Then, when we are establishing our parameters, you will see that all of the parameters that are under the parameters menu when you click on the parameters tab will appear here. You see condition appears here, and I already have that selected. And remember, that was an integer parameter, which means that we can assign this parameter a number value, and when the integer is set to that number, the transition to the attack animation will take place, and the attack animation will play. I have set my integer to 2. And you can do this manually by inputting the number 2 next to the integer parameter we had created under the Parameters tab, and doing so will play the attack animation. And setting it back to 0 will cause the walking animation to play for the character when we play the scene, and we will want to establish this in the transition from the attack animation back to the walking animation. But we don't want to do this manually. We will want the transitions between animations to play during the game when a certain key command is entered, and that is going to require some code. And this is where that sixth standard for language arts comes in, as students will have to determine the best method, given their knowledge of the coding language and/or resources presented to them, to aid them in enhancing their knowledge thereof. For instance, as the teacher you can pose the following question. Considering that you have to trigger certain events that you have included and established the parameters for in the Animator, how can you add to the script in order to play out to those events? It can be something to that effect, and such a question does promote higher order thinking because there are a number of methods that can be utilized, and students can reference existing knowledge of the coding language, as well as reference material provided on the Unity website to determine how to add to the code we have already created in order to move our character, which is outlined in the previous video. And in a previous video, I may have mentioned that the variables, the different things the program will call upon, are included in the namespace. And being that this is something you may have already gone over with your students after getting this far into the project, students may draw upon that knowledge and determine that some variable needs to be added to the namespace. And that variable is the animator, as that is what the code will have to reference. And there is a glossary of sorts on the Unity website, which I will be linking in the description below, that tells students how to write the line of script that lists the animator as a variable. And we have already established in the animator that when the integer parameter that we created is set to 2, the attack animation will play. Knowing that we want this to happen at the push of a button, students can reference various methods in the input category of Unity's glossary to see how this can be accomplished by referencing potential lines of script and deciding what the best method is based on the description of the corresponding line of script. This is actually what I did to determine how to get my character to attack, and what I came up with was that I had to add a variable for the animator in the namespace as such by typing animator anim. And I included character controller for the character controller as well, since we accessed that to get the character moving. Granted, my script to make the character move worked without this before, but for some reason the attack animation will not play without these two things here. And as I mentioned in a previous video, curly brackets essentially separate different parts of your code, and each different thing you want your character to do will have to be enclosed in its own set of brackets. And the students may already have gone over this, and may conclude that since we are making the program execute another command upon a condition being met, and that a certain component of the program has to be accessed that wasn't accessed before, the animator essentially, that this part of the code will have to be nested in another set of curly brackets. It may take some time for students to figure this out, especially as we have parts of code within different parts of code here, so we have curly brackets within curly brackets. But after examining the code I already had, this is what I logically came up with. After closing out to the part of the code to make the character move along and around the X, Y, and Z axes, write that first line of code to tell the program to retrieve the animator. Introduce the condition that if the character is on the ground, and then introduce another pair of if statements that tell the program to set the integer parameter to 2 when the P button is pressed. And for that, I use the get key down, get key up method. And I already explained the bit about the semicolons in a previous video. Remember that I'm not ending the line with the if statement with a semicolon because that would be like the dependent clause in my sentence. There's something that needs to come after that to complete the idea I'm trying to communicate to the program. Just be sure that that second if statement is there and it's nested within the same set of curly brackets to indicate that the animation should not be playing anymore when the P button is no longer being pressed, and that the integer should be set back to 0, which, as we indicated when making the transition back from the attacking animation in the Animator, will return the Knight of Babel character to the walking state. If you don't have these two lines here, this happens. So I've demonstrated how even the more technical aspects of this project option for students falls within the scope of language arts skills, as students are acquiring and applying knowledge of domain-specific language, and how this involves higher-order critical thinking processes, what with there not being a single way to write the code. However, these technical components of the project can also lend themselves to various reading literature standards, such as these, as animations that are applied to characters and played at specific points in the game can serve to indirectly characterize or communicate certain things about the universe you have created. Take, for instance, all of these animations applied to the Sonic the Hedgehog character when standing still for too long. These animations are indicative of Sonic's too cool for school attitude, and even his confidence, as he's eager to traverse this world that is ripe with environmental hazards and robots bent on enacting Sonic's demise. The plot is advanced through the animation because certain things about the character are revealed as a byproduct. And the animations that are applied to the character can be done with intentionality when creating the video game. Though the animations that I applied came with the character when I downloaded it from the asset store, notice how I didn't apply all of the animations to the character. For instance, I have not applied the running animation, and this could perhaps be because the Knight of Babel character is always calm and collected, even in dire circumstances, and that can further be reflected in his dialogue later on, and can even foreshadow a later conflict that arises because of his lack of urgency. These are just some ideas for project criteria you can employ as the teacher to pertain to specific standards. Also, notice how the character is perpetually in the walking state. This could be due to the fact that even though he is calm and collected, he is always ready to act, and his lack of idling is indicative of his awareness. This isn't actually why I made the walking animation continuously play. I just couldn't figure out how to write the code that would trigger the walking animation. But I think I can apply a bit of what I did for the attack animation to figure it out now, and that is something you can have your students do as well. My code for this is included in the description of the video, so depending on the assignment parameters for your project and the students' games themselves, students can modify this code as appropriate. What is great about a project option like this is that students can work from existing code, familiarize themselves with some of the principles and elements of the coding language, and learn more about the language by applying their knowledge thereof, no matter how vast or limited, to modify existing code. That is, after all, how I am learning the language myself, watching different YouTube tutorials and borrowing and modifying lines of script based on a growing understanding of the rules and syntactical structure of the language from various reference material. A link to the video that I had referenced to create this portion of the code will be linked in the description as well. So, in this series so far, I have demonstrated how various language arts standards can be applied and contextualized using video game design through development of the story and the code. And such an undertaking, especially when students are initially learning about video game design and coding, can take quite some time. My following video will demonstrate how such a project can be employed over an extended period of time while still covering a variety of learning standards and content through a given unit or series of units, as well as more on the coding language to produce various desired outcomes when it comes to a battle system and transitioning between scenes. Until then, and as always, like, comment, and subscribe should you feel so inclined.